of Mice and Men, Chapter 4. Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square four-paned window, and on the other, a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crook's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives and needles and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge. And scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions, for being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books, too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large, gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. This room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth chomping on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. So liniment is like cod liver oil. Back in the day, they would take that stuff and, tell themselves that it made you not sick or it made something not hurt. Cod liver oil and liniment oil were the two things that Grandma and Grandpa would say, go to the bathroom and get the cod liver oil and the liniment if ever I was trying to say, oh, I got a stomach ache, I can't go to school today. Well, go get the cod liver oil and liniment then. And so I did it one time, and then the next time I tried it, I went to school because I was like, nah, I don't think my stomach hurts that much anymore. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment, Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes, he stiffened and a scowl came into his face. His hand came from under his shirt. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, you got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me. Lenny gulped, and his smile grew more fawning. I ain't doing nothing, he said. Just come to look at my puppy and seen your light, he explained. Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on, get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room. Why aren't you wanted? Lenny asked. 'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play because I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, you all of you stink to me. Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. Everybody went into town, he said. Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble. I seen your light. Well, what do you want? Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and set. Crooks stared at Lenny. And he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway, he complained. You ain't no Skinner. They's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses. The pup, Lenny repeated. I come to see my pup. Well, go see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted. Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and backed to the door again. I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him very much. Crooks said, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else. Remember, you don't take something out of its nest. You're afraid that you'll get too much human scent on him, and then the mom or the old lady won't feed them anymore. Especially in kind of a wild situation on a ranch where they're not like house dogs, they're barn dogs.
Yeah, I was some experience with that. Like one time I grabbed a baby duckling and then her mom killed it. So.
Oh, she don't care. She lets me. Lenny had moved into the room again. Crooks scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. Come on in and sit a while, Crooks said. Long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down. His tone was a little more friendly. All the boys gone into town, huh? All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring. Crooks adjusted his glasses. Figuring? What's Candy figuring about? Lenny almost shouted. About the rabbits. You're nuts, said Crook. You're crazy as a wedge. What rabbits you talking about? The rabbits we're going to get. I get to tend them, cut grass, and give them water, and like that. Just nuts, said Crooks. I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight. Lenny said quietly, It ain't no lie. We're going to do it. Going to get a little place and live on the fat of the land. Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. Sit down, he invited. Sit down on the nailed keg. Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. You think it's a lie? Lenny said. But it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George. Crooks put his dark chin in his pink palm. You travel around with George, don't you? Sure. Me and him go every place together, Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on, and you don't know what the hell it's all about. Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them, and some of them was pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew till long later why he didn't like that. But I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another colored family for miles around. And now there ain't a colored man on this ranch. And there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why, it's just an N saying it. So I want to ask something. Does Lenny see color? So we are made to believe that all the other people are smart and Lenny's dumb somehow. We've said maybe a mental condition like autism. But then here's the dumb person not seeing color. Shouldn't that be the condition that the smart people exercise? Lenny asked, how long do you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? Crooks laughed again. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't go blabbing. Couple of weeks and them pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just an N talking and a busted back N. So it don't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if you don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking, and they're sitting still not talking. It don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things, and it don't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy, that's all. He paused. His voice grew soft and persuasive. S'pose George don't come back no more. S'pose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What do you do then? Lenny's attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said suppose George went into town tonight and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward, some kind of private victory. Just suppose that, he had repeated. He won't do it, Lenny cried. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I've been with George a long time. He'll come back tonight. But the doubt was too much for him. Don't you think he will? Crook's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Nobody can't tell what a guy'll do, he observed calmly. Let's say he wants to come back and can't. Suppose he gets killed or hurt and he can't come back. Lenny struggled to understand. George won't do nothing like that, he repeated. George is careful. He won't get hurt. He ain't never been hurt because he's careful. So again, Lenny sees the world very simply. Nice, mean, kind, jerk, man, woman, like just simple understanding, right? And so here's Crooks giving him this nuanced torture of what would you do? Like it's a little bit over Lenny's head. Well, just suppose he don't come back. What you'll do then? Lenny's face wrinkled with apprehension. I don't know. Say what you doing anyways, he cried. This ain't true. George ain't got hurt. Crooks bored in on him. Want me to tell you what'll happen? They'll take you to the booby hatch. They'll tie you up with a collar like a dog. Booby hatch, insane asylum. Suddenly, Lenny's eyes centered and grew quiet and mad. He stood up and walked dangerously toward Crooks. Who hurt George? He demanded. Crooks saw the danger as it approached him. He edged back on his bunk to get out of the way. I was just supposing, he said. George ain't hurt. He's all right. He'll be back all right. Lenny stood over him. What you supposing for? Ain't nobody gonna suppose no hurt to George. Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. Just sit down, he said. George ain't hurt. Lenny growled back to his seat on the nail keg. Ain't nobody gonna talk no hurt to George, he grumbled. Crooks said gently, maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's coming back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play rummy card game 'cause you were black. How'd you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you got to read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him, he whined. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is, long's he's with you. I tell ya, he cried. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. George gonna come back, Lenny reassured himself in a frightened voice. Maybe George come back already. Maybe I better go see. Crooks said, I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. A guy sits alone out here at night, maybe reading books or thinking of stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking, and he's got nothing to tell him what's so and what's ain't so. Maybe if he sees something, he don't know whether it's right or not. He can't turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. He can't tell. He got nothing to measure by. I seen things out here. I wasn't drunk. I don't know if I was asleep. If some guy was with me, he could tell me I was asleep, and then it would be all right. But I just don't know. Crooks was looking across the room now, looking toward the window. Lenny said miserably, George won't go away and leave me. I know George won't do that. So, remember, Lenny's dangerous. He grabbed onto that red velvet dress of the girl in Weed, California, and wouldn't let go, and then she accused him of rape. And then grabs Curly's hand and crushes it and won't let go. The stable buck went on dreamily. I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch, had two brothers. They was always near me, always there. So had two brothers. All of the verb tense in these characters' dialogues are very interesting to me. They was always near me, always there. Used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all three. Had a strawberry patch, had an alfalfa patch. Used to turn the chickens out in the alfalfa on a sunny morning. My brothers sat on a fence rail and watched them. White chickens they was. Gradually, Lenny's interest came around to what was being said. George says we're going to have a alfalfa for the rabbits. What rabbits? We're going to have rabbits and a berry patch. You're nuts. We are too. You ask George. You're nuts. Crooks was scornful. I seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on the ranches with their bindles on their back and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on. And every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head. And never a goddamn one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out here. Nobody never gets to heaven, and nobody gets no land. It's just in their head. They're all the time talking about it, but it's just in their head. He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly, and the halter chains clinked. A horse whinnied. I guess somebody's out there, Crooks said. Maybe Slim. Slim comes in sometimes 2-3 times a night. Slim's a real Skinner. He looks out for his team. He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. That you, Slim? He called. Candy's voice answered. Slim went to town. Say you seen Lenny? You mean the big guy? Yeah, you seen him around any place? He's in here, Crooks said shortly. He went back to his bunk and lay down. Candy stood in the doorway, scratching his bald wrist and looking blindly into the lighted room. He made no attempt to enter. Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring out about them rabbits. Oh, sorry. Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring about them rabbits, Crook said irritably. You can come in if you want. So I get that every time I read about the guy like rubbing his amputation, I always get like the tinglies down my legs, like I have ants in my pants. And I think we talked about it in first period. I think it's from another coincidence that I don't know if I've told you guys about with me and Barb. So we went to the same middle school. She wrote Foxy on our yearbook. In her book, she was a grade below me. I moved to Seattle, then came back, worked at the middle school that was the middle school that her elementary school fed into. So she would do sixth grade move up or fifth grade move up, or no, sixth grade. Yeah, Spokane only had seventh and eighth in middle school then. I think they still might. I don't know. Anyway, so she would do sixth grade move ups, tours, and saw the Mr. Canals that's on my window right here behind the Star Wars guys, and popped her head in to see if it was me. And then all my kids were like, who is that really pretty blonde girl popping her, looking in our room? And anyway, the kids didn't say that, but I said that. So anyway, there's a bunch of coincidences. One of the biggies, the Spike and Butch, my snakes, named after Tom and Jerry's dog foes. And then the other one is my grandpa, when he was a kid, cut his thumb off chopping wood on his left hand. And so he would always like mess with me with it, like rub it on my head and like do weird things and like to like gross me out. So that's why I get that gross out. And then come to find out, Barb's grandpa, exact same thing, only worse, like more of all of that. My grandpa's is just like that. But isn't that weird? There's so many coincidences. It's weird. Nothing? You can come in if you want. Curly seemed embarrassed. I don't know. Of course, if you want me to, come on in. If everybody's coming in, you might just as well. It was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. Candy came in. So he had pleasure for having company. See, look what Lenny did. Lenny just opened this doorway up for Crooks. That I'm not going to judge you. I don't see your skin color. All I know is kind and mean. So he like brought that joy to Crooks. Candy came in, but he was still embarrassed. So embarrassed because he's hanging around a black guy. Is that what we're supposed to read into that? You got a nice cozy little place in here, he said to Crooks. Must be nice to have a room all by yourself this way. Sure, said Crooks. And a manure pile under the window. Sure, it's swell. Lenny broke in. You said about the rabbits. Candy leaned against the wall beside the broken collar while he scratched the wrist stump. I've been here a long time, he said, and Crook's been here a long time. This is the first time I ever been in this room.